Imagine this. It's the opening years of the 11th century. You are a Saxon monk living in Malmesbury. It's a beautiful place to live, and you enjoy your time at prayer. However, you and the other brethren are a bit worried about your fellow monk. He seems to be convinced he can fly. You know the human body cannot physically fly. You're aware of the mind flying in its imagination and the soul flying towards God in the heavenly spheres. You're aware of Christ's ascension into heaven. You're aware of angels and demons flying in the air. You're aware of that pagan figure, Wayland the Smith, creating magical wings to fly, and Daedalus too. But you've never heard of a flying human in real life, and certainly not a flying monk. You know that defying God is an arrogant act, and monks such as yourself must be humble. Eilmer, however, doesn't seem to understand this. He, like you, has heard the story of Wayland and the story of Daedalus, and unlike you, he has taken it to be true. To make matters worse, your abbot approves of his wild theories. He's even allowed Eilmer to make himself a pair of wings with local supplies. Eilmer talks about the willow and parchment wings with great pride. You, however, think it's a waste of decent parchment. Now you and your fellow monks stand around the abbey's tower, about to watch Eilmer either defy God or kill himself. Either way, it will be a spectacle of tremendous proportions. When Eilmer jumps, you prepare for the sickening crunch of death. However, somehow he manages to do it. He actually flies. He flies an entire furlong over the abbey walls and into the nearby settlement. You cannot believe it. He actually did it. He must have God's approval for this insane scheme. Within seconds, you hear screaming, then a crash and a shattering of wood and the ripping of parchment. You and your fellow monks sprint out of the abbey and into the village. Eilmer lays on the ground, screaming in agony. It is not hard to see why. You may not be a physician, but you know legs are not supposed to bend like that. You look away to throw up your midday meal. While you are preoccupied, a fellow monk slaps your back, and the other monks carry a still screaming Eilmer to the monastery infirmary, while the local laity talk amongst themselves about the marvelous failure that they witnessed. When your stomach settles, you know this is a day that the Malmesbury community will never ever forget. Hello, my name is Viktor Athelstan, and today I am discussing Eilmer of Malmesbury, aka the Flying Monk. Before I start, I have a few questions for you to think about while you watch the video. 1. If you were a monk at Malmesbury, how would you react to seeing Eilmer fly? 2. What surprises you most about Eilmer's story? 3. Does your town/family have some borderline unbelievable but true stories about someone within living memory or within the last few generations? 4. If you could ask Eilmer any question, what question would you ask him? I'm doing this just because when I watch video-based media, I sometimes don't think about what I've seen, and so I'm trying to break that habit by, creating questions. If you're also trying to think more critically about what you learn and watch, I hope you enjoy the questions, and if you're watching this just to relax, that's fine too. You don't have to think about the questions. You have free will. Or you can always think about it later. I think I'll start asking questions at the beginning of my video essays, just as a bit of a critical thinking exercise. Anyway, Eilmer the Flying Monk. As unbelievable as the story of a flying monk may seem, it is generally agreed upon by historians that a monk named Eilmer did try to fly at Malmesbury. For context, the only reason we know about Eilmer's flight is because medieval historian William of Malmesbury wrote about it in his Chronicle of the Kings of England. My cold open features a dramatization of what happened. I'm going to read the primary source in a little bit, so you can hear the whole story from William's words, including what details William does and does not include. It's important to note that William of Malmesbury is generally considered to be an extremely reliable historian and not one to rely upon rumors and hearsay. According to scholar Ming Lu, when William must rely upon unreliable sources instead of eyewitnesses or written documents, he tends to make note of it. So, how are scholars sure that Eilmer's story is true? Well, besides William being a reliable source, he lived in the same abbey that Eilmer did. Granted, the two men never met, as Eilmer almost certainly died before William was born, but William would have heard the story from monks who knew Eilmer as an elderly man. See, William was born sometime in the 1090s or as early as the mid to late 1080s. He went to Malmesbury Abbey as a child. William of Malmesbury was dedicated to recording English history. He lived after the Norman conquest, so many pre-conquest documents had been destroyed, whether it be by the Normans or the Vikings. Events were still within living memory or had been passed down down through people who had seen them, to their family members and friends and so on. As a historian, recording oral history into written history was important to William, as it was for a lot of people after the Norman Conquest. There's an entire book about it called From Memory to Written Record that I've not read the entirety of. After all, without writing history down, oral history and past recollections are in danger of being forgotten. Had it not been for William of Malmesbury, we would not know about Eilmer today. There are a lot of stories about people flying in the early Middle Ages and the later Middle Ages. However, these stories generally have an element of the supernatural about them. There is Christ's ascension, legendary characters like Wayland the Smith creating wings to fly, sorcerers controlling demons to make themselves or others fly, demons and angels flying on their own, demons lifting people up into the air to scare them, and the concept of souls and the mind flying in different ways in Old English poetry. Eilmer's story doesn't mention magic. Instead, it is very much scientifically focused. It also had elements of a cautionary tale. It is worth noting that Eilmer is not the first man to attempt flight. Abbas ibn Firnas, a polymath living in Cordoba in present-day Spain, also tried and failed to fly in around 875. It is worth noting that Abba ibn Firnas' story was recorded by Moroccan historian al-Makari over 700 years after his death. He used sources that no longer survive, but in his account of Firnas' flight, he referenced a contemporary poet who mentioned the flight in one of his poems. So is it possible that Eilmer heard about Firnas' attempt at flight? Yes, but there currently is no proof of it. Unless a contemporary source is discovered, it is reasonable to believe that both men invented wings independently and attempted to fly. We know Eilmer lived at least into his 80s because he saw Halley's Comet twice in his life. The fact that he saw Halley's Comet helped us narrow down when Eilmer lived. According to Wikipedia, Halley's Comet appears every 72 to 80 years. The comet appeared in 989 when Eilmer was likely somewhere between 4 to 7 years old. Then in 1066, he saw the comet again. Eilmer saw the comet as a bad omen. If you know anything about English history or the history of the English language, your ears probably perked up when I said 1066. And if you don't, that's perfectly fine. Today you're going to learn something new. But before we get into all that, it's time for some brief shameless self-promotion. Do you like monks? I assume you do, as you clicked on this video. My novel, Decessit Vita Matris, is about a monk named Gilbert who has his own flight of sorts, but his is of the demonic nature. Demonic flight is also relevant to today's video, by the way. My novel plays around with medieval demon lore, specifically the idea of demon children and the consequences of a world where demons and angels can change a person's sex. The medieval French poem, Eid and Olive, was inspiration for my own world building. So if you're interested in reading a novel about Cistercian monks, knights, and the complexities of gender set in 13th century Devon, Decessit Vita Matris is available on sale on Itch.io, Amazon, and through order at your local bookstore. I'm no longer selling the ebook on Amazon due to the Kindle AI BS. Due to increasing censorship online regarding queer art, I do recommend you purchase as a book. There's a link in the description if you'd like to read it. I'd also like to thank my patrons, Mateus and Carl, over on Patreon for their support. Paid members get to see early versions of scripts, including this one, works in progress of my web novels, discussions of what I'm researching, and travel photos. If you're interested in becoming a patron, please do check out my Patreon. Tiers start at $1 a month, and everything is accessible even at the lowest tier. Every bit of support really helps. Okay, enough shameless self-promotion, let's talk about flying monks. Here is our primary source. Soon after a comet, a star denoting, as they say, changing kingdoms, appeared trailing its extended and fiery train across the sky. Wherefore, a certain monk of our monastery, by name Eilmer, bowing down with terror at the sight of the brilliant star, wisely exclaimed, "Thou art come, a matter of lamentation. To many a mother art thou come. I have seen thee long since, but now I behold thee much more terrible, threatening to hurl destruction on this country." He was a man of good learning for those times, of mature age, and in his early youth had hazarded an attempt of singular temerity. He had by some contrivance fastened wings to his hands and feet, in order that, looking upon the fable as true, he might fly like Daedalus, and collecting the air on the summit of a tower, had flown for more than the distance of a furlong. But, agitated by the violence of the wind and the current of air, as well as by the consciousness of his rash attempt, he fell and broke his legs, and was lame ever after. He used to relate as the cause of his failure his forgetting to provide himself a tail. What exactly does William of Malmesbury's account tell us? It tells us that Aylmer was an educated man. He lived in Anglo-Saxon England. He was knowledgeable about the stars and could tell that he was looking at the same comet that he had seen as a young boy. He also knew that comets were ill omens and they could signify a change in rulership. Anyone remember Comet Neowise? That was 2020. Could be a coincidence, of course. We also learn that when Aylmer was a young man, he thought that Daedalus myth could be recreated. He crafted a pair of wings in an attempt to fly. He went to the top of a tower, flew a furlong, about 220 feet, before the wind and his own panic caused him to crash and break both of his legs. Breaking his legs permanently disabled him. Aylmer recognized the design error of his wings and would tell people for years afterwards it would have worked had he added a tail. While William of Malmesbury's account of Aylmer's flight is incredibly interesting, it is also extremely sparse. It does not specify what tower he jumped off of, but presumably it was the Abbey Church Tower. The Saxon Malmesbury Abbey building no longer exists, but churches generally have towers. The Abbey's tower likely would have been the tallest building in Malmesbury at the time. The account does not specify what exactly Aylmer's wings looked like or what they were made out of, nor does William's account describe how the other monks reacted to the flight. We can infer that people asked Aylmer about it due to the fact he would frequently say that the experiment would have worked had he put on a tail. It's also entirely possible that Aylmer brought this up on his own. I think anyone confident enough to jump off an Abbey tower and try to fly when the technology was not there yet probably did bring it up on his own. However, we don't really know because the account does not specify. We also don't know if the experiment was done in secret or not. The flight definitely wasn't a secret. Building the wings was likely done in the open with the abbot's permission. After all, Aylmer would need supplies and a place to build the wings. If he used fabric, he could have stolen a sheet or something, but if he used parchment, which is animal skin and very expensive and time intensive to make, then he certainly would have had to have permission to use the supplies. So while Malmesbury was a wealthy abbey with royal favor, I can't imagine an abbot being happy about their monks stealing expensive parchment for any reason, least of all to make a pair of wings to fly. People must have helped Aylmer access the supplies, but did he have help building the wings? The source doesn't say. It's possible someone else helped him with the construction, but we simply don't know. According to local folklore, Oliver's Lane was where Aylmer landed, but as we saw in the primary source, William doesn't specify where he flew, only that he flew a furlong. However, it's also important to note that there is a hill by Malmesbury Abbey, so it's possible that he jumped off the tower and flew downhill, which is not where Oliver's Lane is. Now, the reason that the lane is called Oliver's Lane and not Aylmer's Lane is due to a scribal error in the 14th century. We don't know exactly how old Aylmer was during the flight. Lynn White Jr. points out that William said Aylmer flew in his early youth, the Latin term being prima juventute. In the Middle Ages, a person's lifespan was classified into several categories. According to Teish Porrick, in Old English and Anglo-Latin texts, the ages of man varied between 3 to 6 distinct stages. Prima juventute means Aylmer would have been under the age of 25, but older than 14 years old. At risk of applying modern-day views to historical time periods, teenage boys and men in their early 20s generally don't make smart decisions regarding their physical safety all the time. The flight likely occurred sometime between 1000 to 1010, but if Aylmer was nearer to 7 years old when he saw the comet, it could have been earlier if we suppose Aylmer was under the age of 25. Anyway, my hypothesis is that Aylmer was somewhere in his late teens to early 20s when he attempted to fly. We don't know how many people witnessed the flight. Aylmer's fellow monks probably watched it. Certainly anyone living near the monastery witnessed it if he flew over them, if he was flying into town, or into the nearby settlement rather. Even if people missed seeing the flight itself, they certainly heard about it. The story spread from William of Malmesbury's texts, and various chronicles in the Middle Ages wrote about Aylmer, including Hellenand and a monk at Fermont, Alberic, a monk of Troyes Fontaines, Vincent of Beauvais, and Ranulph Higden, who was a monk in Chester. Ranulph Higden is the one who misread Aylmer's name as Oliver in his Polychronicon. I will also note that Lynn White Jr., whose article I got this information from, misspells Ranulph's name as Ralph. It's possible that Ranulph is a variation of Ralph, but Wikipedia was unclear, and I did not feel like going down that rabbit hole. If you do know whether or not Ralph is a variant spelling of Ranulph, please do tell me in the comments, because I did look it up, but it was unclear. So you might be wondering to yourself, why did Aylmer want to fly? Clearly he was fascinated by the sky. He could recognize Halley's Comet as a returning comet. He also wrote a few now lost astrological treatises. His flight reflects his obsession with the sky. William says Aylmer was inspired by the myth of Daedalus. However, that probably wasn't Aylmer's only inspiration. History and historical figures' lives do not exist in a vacuum. As an educated man and monk, Aylmer was certainly exposed to outside sources and influences. An obvious influence would be Christian stories about flight and flying. Aylmer would have known about the ascension of Christ. This was when Christ went up into heaven after his death and resurrection. Iconography of the ascension in the early Middle Ages usually had Jesus being lifted up in the air by angels or a cloud. However, in the early 11th century, the iconography changed. Scholar James Pax writes that, quote, the new Anglo-Saxon iconography portrayed Christ in the process of vanishing into heaven, with his upper body already hidden in the clouds and only his lower torso or feet still manifest, unquote. Pax argues that people in the early Middle Ages, quote, could attain the highest heights of heaven in spirit, their bodies must remain on earth, unquote, and that the disappearing Christ is a depiction from the spectator's point of view. The change in art reflects a change in view regarding English culture at the time. This change in culture could be why Aylmer felt as though he could fly, but Christ is an exception to the human norm. He is both God and man and born without sin. Aylmer was only man, and as James Pack points out, quote, ordinary flesh was thought to be weighed down by sin, not only metaphorically, but literally, unquote. William frames Aylmer's story as a cautionary tale and not one to be emulated. The fact that Aylmer thought he could fly displays a type of arrogance unbecoming in a monk who is supposed to be humble and live a life of humility. Trying to fly and breaking God's laws would certainly be an arrogant thought, especially when human flesh was believed to be weighted down by sin. The fact that Aylmer breaks both his legs and is disabled for the rest of his life further emphasizes the cautionary element of the story. While Aylmer does fly, he does not remain in flight or in the air like Christ did, but come crashing down, shattering his very human body. Jesus Christ is not the only Christian figure associated with flight that Aylmer would have known. There are also angels and demons. Demons especially were known to grab saints and other holy people and carry them up into the air to frighten them. Demons were also known in stories to help sorcerers fly. These supernatural creatures were portrayed with wings in Old English manuscripts. On screen now, there are some of the depictions of angels and demons that I was talking about. In MS-UNIS 11, they are drawn as human figures with bird-like wings. Additionally, in the Malmesbury manuscript, Cambridge Corpus Christi College MS 023, there are illustrations of angels with wings. Both of these manuscripts are believed to have been done by the same artist. Cambridge Corpus Christi College MS 023 is dated to be around 975 AD to 1050 AD. If it was made earlier, then it is possible Aylmer was inspired by the angel's wings in this manuscript. Additionally, in the manuscript, there are illuminations of people's clothing being blown by the wind. Perhaps this also inspired Aylmer in some way. However, this is only a hypothesis and cannot be definitely proven because we don't know when exactly the manuscript was made. But if it was earlier, I think we have a pretty good case. We also don't know if any lost manuscripts had images that Aylmer may have been inspired by as well. William says Aylmer was inspired by the myth of Daedalus, so he had either heard it from someone else or the abbey had a book with the story in it. Speaking of pagan myths, Aylmer would have likely known about Wayland the Smith. Wayland the Smith is an Old English pagan figure who made himself a pair of wings. However, his wings were made with an element of magic. Finally, flight was an element in some Old English poetry, but the flight was either of the mind's imagination or the soul's flight up to heaven to be near God. Flying in this way, as your mind or soul, not physical body, was associated with spiritual purity. And so that would probably be why Aylmer would want to fly, because of the association with Christ and divinity. I mentioned the year 1066 earlier. If you don't know, 1066 is the year of the Norman Conquest. The Norman Conquest was when William the Conqueror came over from France, Normandy, and took over England. He did have a claim to the throne, and it was a severe upheaval to English society as a whole. So 1066 is arguably the most important date in English history. It is certainly the most important date in the history of the English language. After the Norman Conquest, a lot more French was introduced into English, the language. Now, the people of England saw the comet as an omen. The comet is even embroidered in the Bayeux tapestry, which recounts the Norman conquest in embroidery form. The tapestry will also be on display in England in the British Museum from September 2026 to July 2027. You can also see a more modern recreation of the tapestry in Reading. So if we consider that Eilmer saw Halley's Comet twice in his life, that meant he saw it in 989 AD as a young child. There's no entry for the year 990 AD in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, but in 991 AD, the entry reads as follows. This year was Ipswich plundered, and very soon afterwards was Alderman Brionth slain at Malden. In this same year, it was resolved that tribute should be given, for the first time, to the Danes for the great terror they occasioned by the sea coast. That was first £10,000. The first who advised this measure was Archbishop Sirik. So living through the Danish invasions and battles as a child must have been extremely traumatic for young Eilmer. We do not know where he lived as a child, but it is likely somewhere in Wiltshire. While the battles occurred in East Anglia, it would have still been worrying for anyone living in the country being invaded and attacked, especially by the Vikings, who were able to easily navigate rivers and come and go as they pleased across England. The events of 991 and beyond were likely associated in Eilmer's mind with the comet of 1066 AD. It's also worth noting that in 1003, Wiltshire, where Malmesbury is located, was the site of conflict. Then in 1005, England had a famine. The stress from external instability may have also made Eilmer thinking attempting to fly was a good idea. Now again, I am at risk of prescribing modern-day thought to past people, but I do think that people under a lot of external stress, no matter what time period they live in, are prone to living a little more dangerously and doing foolish things they might not do otherwise. Perhaps Eilmer even thought that flying in the air, close to God, was better than being on Earth where there was pain and suffering. But again, I don't have any proof of Eilmer's thought processes. This is just kind of what I'm thinking. Additionally, Eilmer had written some now lost works on astrology, and my God, do I wish they had survived today. So this contributes to his lifelong fascination with the heavens above Earth. Now, before I end the video, I do want to talk a little bit about Eilmer of Malmesbury in the modern day. This section is unscripted, so I'm just going to kind of talk about my own experiences when I visited Malmesbury. So I did go to Malmesbury in 2024. That was a lot of fun. It was really cool because in the town itself, there is a lot of imagery of Eilmer flying. They're very proud of Eilmer. When I went, it was the 1000th year of King Athelstan, so I had to go, obviously, with my name and everything. And they had this walk, and part of the walk they being the town of Malmesbury, had plaques talking about different historical figures in Malmesbury or associated with Malmesbury, and there were quite a few of these plaques associated with Eilmer. They'll be on screen while I'm talking about this. So that was really cool. One of the other things that I really liked, there was a cafe, I can't remember which one, but I think it was a chain. I think it might have been Coffee Zero, I can't remember, that had a chalk drawing of Eilmer flying. That's also going to be on screen sometime in this section. So that was really cool. And there's just like a lot of flying monk imagery around town and the surrounding areas. In one of the towns, I can't remember which one, but I'll put the text on the screen which one it was, had a pub called the Flying Monk. I got a picture of the sign, which was really cool, although that picture is not of Eilmer, that's of Matthew Paris. So I don't know why they used a picture of Matthew Paris praying to the Virgin Mary rather than a picture of Eilmer. They could have drawn one. Also, Malmesbury used to have a pub called the Flying Monk, but it's no longer around. Another thing is a lot of gift shops had stories about Eilmer that people had written. I got a pamphlet, and then I also got another little book that was was really cool. It was called Malmesbury's Merry Monks. I'll show a picture of it. That was really cute. It was like stories for people 7 to 70. I really enjoyed that book. I read it. It was really cute. Yeah, so they have the pamphlet. Also, part of their marketing for a charity, they're selling these cards of a teddy bear in a monk costume with wings jumping out of Malmesbury Abbey. Again, I'll show this on the screen. That was really cute. I bought a couple of those because I liked that, and it went towards a good cause. So besides things in Malmesbury, there's also a short film about Eilmer that I have not been able to find, but there are stills of it online. Now, there is also an animation on YouTube that I could find, and I'll link in the description, because I really enjoyed this little animation someone made, I think on like a Nintendo DS, but I'm not sure, of Eilmer flying and breaking his legs. That was really cute. Also, apparently the Royal Air Force in the 80s did experiments on like Eilmer's flight. I wasn't able to find out too much about it because the book that documents this is a rare book, and I just wasn't able to get access to that in time for this video. So yeah, so that's kind of some of the stuff that you'll see about Eilmer in Malmesbury and around Malmesbury. If you have the chance to visit Malmesbury, I definitely recommend doing so. It's very nice. It's a nice town, at least when I visited. Everyone there was really nice. They're really eager to talk to you, which I really enjoyed. There is not a lot to do in Malmesbury. I think I stayed for a few days and I was kind of running out of stuff to do, but that is not for lack of trying on the part of the town council and tourist board or whoever runs the tourism stuff in Malmesbury. They were trying really, really hard. They had all these trails when I was there because it was for King Athelstan's anniversary. So it was really good. One of the trails was like, come look at all of our bridges, that you can walk all of our bridges. Another one with the Athelstan trail. It was basically just going from place to place, finding different like plaques. I thought it was going to be a bit more like, oh, look at these artifacts, not artifacts, but look at these buildings, but it really wasn't. Also, fun fact about Malmesbury, the first person in England killed by a tiger was killed in Malmesbury and buried there. So that's a little fun fact. So it's a beautiful, beautiful place. I went in late August, and then I went to Oxford afterwards, and Oxford had a lot more stuff to do, but Malmesbury was really nice. I think if I was going to go to Malmesbury again, which now I live in the States, so that's going to be really difficult, but if I was going to go again, I think it would be a good place to do a writing retreat, because I stayed at this really nice hotel, I think the King's Arms. Again, I'll put the title on the screen because this is unscripted, and that was really lovely. I stayed in the stables, and each stable was like converted into a bedroom with a really nice bathroom and a TV and a really nice bed. I think the only thing that would have made it perfect was if they had a mini fridge, but they didn't, so that's okay. They also didn't clear out the trash, but everything else about it was really clean and nice. And I think if I was going to go again, make it into a writing retreat, because there's just not a lot to do in Malmesbury. Again, not for lack of trying, it's just a small town. And yeah, so there's a lot of like cool things. The Abbey itself, the Norman Abbey, doesn't really survive that much. I mean, part of it does, and you can go in and you can see the Norman architecture, and it's a community space as well as a church, but a lot of the Abbey buildings don't really survive, thanks to Henry VIII, my arch nemesis. He doesn't know that we have beef, but we do. So yes, that is my trip to Malmesbury, and the weather was lovely. Again, beautiful scenery, really nice river. Oh, the Athelstan Museum there, gorgeous, very nice little museum. It's nice to walk around. The people there are very friendly. So yeah, I'd visit again, but as a day trip because I'd already been, or as a writing retreat. Well, actually, now that I'm living in America, I'd just go for a day trip. I wouldn't do a writing retreat if I was traveling for my vacation, unless they did a writing retreat. Then I would absolutely sign up. If they need a writer in residence to write about Eilmer or monks, let me know. All right, so that's going to be our video for today. I hope you found it educational and enjoyable. Now, at the beginning, I asked these questions. They're on the screen now. And now that you've finished the video and know more about Eilmer of Malmesbury, have your answers changed? If so, in what ways? I've not decided what I'm going to make my next video on, but if you have any suggestions, please do let me know. I'm kind of leaning towards another easy video. I'm kind of thinking about doing an easier video with less research versus these more research-intensive ones every other, just so I have time and I'm able to make more. So I'm kind of leaning towards an easy one like the haunted doll industry, which is an industry, but I've not really decided yet. That video on demons that I said I was going to make is taking a bit longer than I thought, research-wise, because there's just so much I want to read and so much I know, and it's just hard to condense it all down and decide what to include and what not to include. And, oh, should I do 2 parts? You know, all that. But anyway, thank you, and goodbye until next time.